How we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network as we welcome you to our Season 6, Week 3 Around the NCAA recap show. Your Pitt Panthers here coming off of their first victory of the season. They improved to 1-1, a dramatic 37-34 victory over Temple at home that required a game-winning field goal from freshman kicker Johnny Midday at the end of the game to win this one. And it was a game that was very interesting for the Panthers. They struggled early on, went down 24-3 at one point as Temple had scored a boatload of points. Kirk comes in, electrifies the Panther offense in the second quarter. They finish out with a touchdown and a field goal at the half. Then in the third quarter, 14 points, and then 7 points in the fourth quarter. A huge string of points for the Panthers. I think it was 20 or 31 points straight maybe at one point. They just were on fire and were able to take a big lead. Then, unfortunately, some just poor control of the football as well as some poor play calling allowed Temple to claw right back into the game. And Pitt had to, muster up one final winning drive to be able to come away with this one, 37-34. Now, tough game overall. Kirk, you look at the stat line, 3 interceptions, disappointing, but he did throw 149 yards, did have a touchdown. And you could argue that probably the 2 interceptions in the first half were more on him. The one in the second half was more KJ Welch didn't come back to the ball. But Kirk was electrifying elsewhere. 58 yards and a touchdown run. Davion Reynolds ran for 50 yards. CJ London ran for 66 yards. So that's the kind of balance that he helps to provide with the Panthers attack. He can do so much more, do a lot with his legs. Jake Keys, of course, led the way receiving 6 catches for 62 yards. But then beyond that, the Panthers really struggled to move the football. Benjamin Ogden had 1 big catch. The fantastic throw might have been the best throw we've seen all season. Kirk with that great throw to the outside. The offensive line was very good. The Panthers ran for a ton of yards. The defense was okay. Again, they gave Temple the ball back in some inopportune spots. You remember we needed Davion Reynolds to give us a big kick return on that final drive, as well as he scored a punt return touchdown as well. Some impressive return ability that we have not seen in quite some time. But it helped make up for how we struggled. Didn't force a ton of turnovers. Did have 4 sacks, which is a good improvement from the Tennessee game. Jalen Hills looked very good, had a pair of sacks. It was a solid game for the Panthers, no doubt about that. Very solid game, but nothing spectacular. Eric Fox, good game punting the ball. Reynolds, of course, did very well with the return game. 30-yard average roundabout, but that 57-yarder on the final return of the game proved to be hugely important, as did his 67-yard punt return for a touchdown. He's already put his name in contention for returner of the year as it stands right now, and he's proven that he's just been an electrifying player for the Panthers. Defensively, 246 yards against passing. You can see Bentley actually had a decent day running the football. Temple ran for about 100 yards, a little over that, mainly from their quarterback, though. Archer struggled to get anything really going. The defense has been solid. It's one of those things where there's no superstars on this defense. Avery Heller and Jacob Lachlan, very good safeties, one of the best safety tandems in the country. But the corners are just solid. The linebackers, we already knew were going to be a big question mark. And the defensive line, the pass rushers are all new, other than Ronnie Baker's back, but he hasn't made too much of an impact other than he forced a fumble today. Otherwise, he's been outshined by Jalen Hills. The redshirt sophomore has been very, very good for the Panthers. 3 sacks here in the first 2 games of the season. So it is what it is. The Panthers a bit of a struggle for a start here, but they still are 1-1. Win over Temple, lost to Tennessee, looking to improve going into next week. Around the ACC, though, you can see Duke blown out by Northwestern. Florida State, an easy win over Georgia Tech, 38-7, so more like it from Florida State after struggling versus an FCS opponent. Cornell Washington for Syracuse went out early with an injury. It's not going to expect it to be a long-term injury. She should be back. But that led to a huge win for Florida International over Syracuse, who I mentioned as a dark horse in the ACC. Obviously, they still can be, but they really struggled against FIU. Clemson, big win over an FCS school. Notre Dame, easy win over Virginia. Minnesota knocks off NC State. I believe Jermaine Holloway down injured, of course, we mentioned from their last game with NC State. So McDonald in there at the quarterback again for NC State. Struggled this time, Minnesota with the win. Louisville bounces back after a tough showing last week to beat Kentucky. Boston College, huge upset, one of the upsets of the week, knocking off TCU 42-21. Miami continuing to struggle as they lose to Texas 21-12. Virginia Tech with a huge win, and Wake Forest with another loss. Top 25 games, Penn State escaped a scare against Southern Miss, just held them off for a 10-point win. Oregon with a comfortable victory. Stanford, big win over a Utah team that looked good in their opener, but Stanford just blew them out. And it was an interesting game. Freshman Blake Hunter got to play in that one. We'll see a little bit more of that later on. Instant classic here. UCLA held off a furious rally from Washington the fourth quarter to pull out a 38-35 victory and improve to 2-0. That's a team we'll see later on in the season. Houston escaped a scare against Louisiana Tech to win 31-24. Again, they have the number 3 ranking in the country, but I don't think that'll hold for the course of the season. Alabama, an easy win over an FCS squad, 38-3. Florida, after struggling offensively against Texas A&M, they bounce back with a vengeance. Franklin goes for 4 touchdowns, 255 yards as they blow out South Florida, but he's outdone yet again by Dustin Young and Ole Miss. 62 points and a 7-touchdown performance from the senior quarterback. He's the Heisman favorite through and through. I thought Franklin was going to be the guy this year, but Dustin Young's been incredible. 2 rushing touchdowns, 5 passing touchdowns, no turnovers, and a blowout win over Vanderbilt. Very incredible. North Texas upsets SMU 42-24, so SMU with a loss. Georgia, another big win. Of course, they beat Alabama 49-21 to start the season, or 49-28 to start the season. Now they beat South Carolina 49-17. True freshman A.J. Jackson Stroud with 3 touchdowns, 122 yards, but they do lose Carter Ford to injury. I think they actually play 3 quarterbacks in this game, and that had to play senior Mark Bush had to take over, and he'll start for the next couple of weeks. Oklahoma beats LSU in a huge matchup between 2 sophomore quarterbacks that we were really anticipating. Kelikolio for LSU had a great performance before he went out due to injury. Kimbrough came in. I think he's a junior or senior. Struggled a bit, and LSU could not overcome a good performance by Taylor Savage and Oklahoma in the victory. Tennessee showing that they were more than what they were when we played them, and they struggled from the quarterback position. Look at this. John Gooden got pulled, 2 picks in 6 throws. Their backup quarterback, who's more of a runner, comes in, doesn't do much, but Jaron Ware, their transfer running back, has an incredible game. Smith struggles again for Texas A&M, under 50% completion percentage and a couple of picks. He's been horrific the last 2 weeks. Turnovers completely hurting Texas A&M yet again, and Tennessee gets a victory there. Some other games around the country that I just, when you get this deep in the career mode, or in the Dynasty, I should say, it's fun to see what else is going on around the country and immerse yourself in that. And so that's what we're going to do. You're going to notice these videos are a little bit longer than they used to be, but that's because I love seeing that, and hopefully you guys do too. Bit of a quarterback controversy now for Ohio State. DK Harris, their backup, came in, had a gigantic game in a victory over Purdue. He came in for Barbour and played very, very well. Maryland, the team that we're going to be playing next week, huge comeback, 14 points in the third and the fourth quarter each to complete a comeback victory over Illinois. Derek Muhammad, interesting player to watch. 3 interceptions to go along with 3 touchdowns. We know he's a very good passer. Eric Torres, the transfer halfback from Baylor, 2 touchdowns, 150 yards for him, so big game there. West Virginia escaped with a win over Central Michigan. 3 straight touchdowns, 21 unanswered points, including the game-winning touchdown with 15 seconds to play in the fourth quarter for the Mountaineers to get back to winning ways. So huge game there for West Virginia. Oklahoma State nearly shocked by South Alabama. Needed a touchdown with 1:35 left for Antoine Byrne-Horton's boys. The star sophomore running back, I think he had 2 touchdowns in the Oklahoma State victory. Iowa loses to Iowa State. Just a big rivalry match there. Michael Robinson, the quarterback for Iowa State, went off in this game. Gigantic performance from him. In the American, Cincinnati ends up escaping against Ohio. I talked about Cincinnati as a potential Cinderella team. They keep that alive with a victory over the Bobcats, the 2 highest ranked teams. Or I should say Ohio's highest rank in the MAC, since he's highest ranked in the American. Pac-12 games you can see, SEC, Auburn goes down to Mississippi State. Mississippi State now 3-0, so a surprise team maybe are the Bulldogs as they knock off the Tigers, who've struggled here early on, and they lost to Kentucky in their first game. Now they lose to Mississippi State in a pretty tough, hard-fought battle there, 27-24. Players of the week around the country, we already talked about Dustin Young, 365 total yards, 7 touchdowns, no turnovers. What a game. Peter Stiegel for Texas, 3 sacks, forced a fumble, 6 tackles for a loss, 10 total tackles. Huge game there for the junior left end. Incredible performance for him. But the star of the show, really, Dustin Young, best player in the country by a mile. Right now, and the Heisman, I think, is his to lose just 3 weeks into the season. ACC, Jacquez Brown, 2 picks for Boston College in their upset victory over TCU. And Virginia Tech quarterback Travis Huff, 6 touchdowns, almost 400 yards of offense in a victory over Akron, but Virginia Tech's looked very good in 2 games so far this season. In the American, I want to show you Brooks Lloyd, 2 picks in the sack in the game against us. He ends up winning American Player of the Week, so good for him. And Matt Thomas, interesting to see, Tulsa receiver here, 4 catches, 4 touchdowns, so he ends up winning American Offensive Player of the Week for his performance. Tavares Cruz, very underrated quarterback I talked about. He got a huge bump in the offseason, ends up with a great game in a victory over New Mexico. 295 passing, 51 rushing, 4 touchdowns. And Blake Hunter, like I mentioned in the Pac-12, he got to play some significant minutes, 9 completions, 200 yards, 4 total touchdowns, ran for 55. He was the #1 quarterback recruit last offseason. Number 2 quarterback recruit, I should say. Tristan Richards of Washington was #1. And another guy to look at, Dane Poe. He's a true freshman. He might be like a 70 overall freshman starting for New Mexico State. 252 passing, 113 rushing, 5 touchdowns. Guy's an absolute freak. I think that's the second time he was a Player of the Week in 3 weeks. He's incredible. Just ridiculous. So we'll see what we can see from the Aggies quarterback. Coaches poll, you can see not a ton of movement, obviously, because there weren't a real plethora of upsets or anything like that. The only thing we saw was Oregon moving into the top 10 from the 11 spot. We end up moving up to 11 after our tight victory over Temple, but some serious movement now as Tennessee beat Texas A&M, so they go all the way up to 12. Florida State's up to 13. Washington falls back to 14 with their loss to UCLA. Georgia up to 15 after being a ranked South Carolina team. A&M falls. Oregon State's up. LSU's down. South Carolina's down. So you can see a lot of movement there in the teens because of the ranked matchups that we had last week. There were a ton of ranked gatherings, and it leads to a little bit of a shakeup in the polls, though obviously you can't take too much standing with the polls at this moment in time just because we still have so much season left to play. As you can see, TCU and SMU dropped out after their losses. Big stories to see. I wanted to talk about this guy, Arkansas State quarterback TC Ford. This guy's the real deal. 31 TDs, 7 interceptions, redshirt senior, and he is just an absolute beast. He was really good for them last year, been very good for them this year. Apparently he's a transfer is what the news thing. I'll have to go back and look and see where he transferred from because it said he got the better of his old team, so I guess it'd be whoever they played last week. Maybe if somebody looks at the results, they could let me know who Arkansas State played if they saw it on there, but I don't remember where he would have transferred from, but fantastic player. Some injury reports, things to show. Carter Ford's going to be out for 3 weeks, the Georgia quarterback, so that's huge for them because they got a couple of big games coming up. Adam Harper, Baylor quarterback, I expected a big season out of him. Very good throwing accuracy. He's going to be out for a while. Over on the ACC running back side, Eddie Henderson ran for 1,100 yards last year. He's out with an injury for 3 weeks. Kevin Harmon, Virginia's running back, is out for the season. You got Kade Mitchell, like I mentioned, the Purdue halfback. I think I talked about this last week. He's out for 9 more weeks in an abdominal tear. David Coleman, 1,500 yards. He was a dark horse Heisman candidate. Killed us last year on the ground. He's out for the majority of the season. Bellamy for North Carolina is injured. Grant Grigsby's out for a big portion of the season. Another guy that I thought was going to be a Heisman contender, especially with the incredible team that LSU had. Tough to see him go down. He's one of my favorite players in the country. And Miami with some injury troubles. Derek Sisk, their #1 receiver, one of the top receivers in the ACC, out for a couple more weeks. And David Franklin, who I thought was a dark horse for ACC Receiver of the Year. He crushed us last season. He's out for the entire season with a broken wrist, so we'll be lucky to not have to face him at the end of the year. Around the ACC, some big games. NC State and Nebraska both struggling to start the season. They'll need to rebound. Unbeatens face each other. North Carolina versus Tulsa. You got Duke taking on Florida State, looking to put them on upset alert, but Florida State looked very good against Georgia Tech last week. Miami taking on Wake Forest. Again, 2 teams struggling that don't want their ACC campaigns to slip away already. Syracuse looking to rebound. Cornell Washington should be back in the lineup as they take on Illinois. Boston College looking to remain unbeaten as they take on Buffalo. And Louisville facing Southern Miss. As Southern Miss gave Penn State a good game last week, they'll look to do the same versus Louisville this week. Washington will take on USC in a big Pac-12 matchup. Of course, Washington just lost a heartbreaker to UCLA. USC needs a win if they want to keep pace with UCLA in the Pac-12. Stanford's looked very good to start the season. Their rushing offense is incredible. We know that just seems to be the old school type of football that Stanford likes to play, and they're doing it very, very well this year. It'll be interesting to see them match up with a UCLA team that usually likes to air it out. That'll be a great top 25 matchup there in LA. LSU taking on Georgia in another big ranked matchup. The big story here, of course, is Georgia will be playing their backup quarterback. Mark Bush, the redshirt senior, will start in place of the injured sophomore Carter Ford. Would have been another great sophomore quarterback matchup between superstar recruits Carter Ford and Calicolio of LSU. Would have been a great matchup. Unfortunately, we won't get to see it. Wisconsin taking on Michigan. Jim Harbaugh has been an underachiever. Needs to get a victory here against a tough Wisconsin team, or he'll be right back on the hot seat. Ole Miss taking on Kentucky. Kentucky's been solid, but Dustin Young's just a beast. I'd expect them to win. Battle of the unbeatens here. Army. We know they love to pound the rock. Ian Welsh is a Heisman contender, and not only that, they have an unreal defense. Number 2 in the country, going to go up against an Oklahoma team that's looked very well balanced and incredible. Taylor Savage, of course, for them. Should be a very fun matchup there in Norman. Oklahoma State, Texas, Big 12 matchup. You got Bama, South Carolina, great ranked battle. But the big storyline is, can Bama figure it out through the air? Matt Perry's been really, really bad for Bama so far. Needs to turn around to help them really balance out their offense, because South Carolina, I would assume, is going to key up on the run. Brian Hand, Darian Williams Jr., both very good for Bama. South Carolina will try to shut them down to give themselves an opportunity to win. Tennessee, Florida is going to be a great showdown. Of course, Tennessee gave us all we could handle. Florida, their big story is they've been forcing turnovers. Their defense hasn't been great. Their offense has struggled against marquee opposition. When they played Texas A&M, they're really bad, but they forced so many turnovers, and that was why they were so good. So that should be a fantastic SEC showdown. Miami of Ohio, who won the MAC last year, I believe, taking on Cincinnati who's of the American, should be a great game. Texas A&M looking to rebound. They've had the worst schedule I've ever seen to start the season. Just lost, of course, to Tennessee and Florida consecutively, and now they have to play Oregon in non-conference away in Eugene at Autzen Stadium. I mean, pray for Texas A&M. Going to be a very, very tough battle for them. They've turned the ball over at will. Will need to stop that if they want to come away with a victory over the Ducks. Finally, your Pitt Panthers taking on the Maryland Terrapins, a Maryland team that's been very impressive. We saw they won last week, come from behind victory. They've been good. Their offense has been solid. I mean, they're scoring more than we are. Their offense is putting up more yards than we are. They're looking very, very balanced. They run the ball well. They pass the ball well. Their defense has been okay. Turnover differential is a little better than ours, but not good. Neither of us have been done well at taking care of the football, and that's probably going to be the story of the game. If the Panthers are able to hold on to the football, they probably have the talent to beat Maryland, but it's a hostile environment. They're away from home. They're going to have a young quarterback, because CJ Kirk will be starting this game at quarterback. He's just offered a little bit more to the Panthers. You can see his quarterback rank's a little bit better. TD to INT ratio is about as bad as AC Reese's has been. Completion percentage is not good for either quarterback, but Kirk's shown a bit more of the splash play. He's had a little bit of a longer play. He's taken less sacks, and he can run the ball. Take a look at CJ Kirk. He's the Panthers' leading rusher through 2 games, 105 yards. Davion Reynolds just behind him at 99 yards. CJ London struggling a bit, 80 yards, only 3.8 per carry. AC Reese, 8 yards on 8 carries. CJ Kirk, 20 carries for 105 yards. That's the difference, and why CJ Kirk has been given the starting nod for the Panthers going into this game. Should be a fantastic affair to see what the freshman can do. It's really going to put his mettle to the test, especially against a tough Maryland team. They've got senior leaders. Eric Torres, of course, the transfer from Baylor. He's about 150 yards a game rushing right now. Derek Muhammad's been good, not great, but he's a very solid player. He was the backup to Dustin Young for the last couple of seasons, transferred away from Ole Miss this year to finally get some playing time, and he's done well for Maryland so far. They will be missing right outside linebacker Nigel Jackson to a dislocated ankle. He's a good player, had some sacks last year, tons of tackles, gets around the football field, so they will miss him, but they do have a well-rounded team. I will say about Maryland, no studs other than quarterback Derek Muhammad, 95 overall. They don't have anybody else above 90, but they're pretty well-rounded. When you look at the rest of their starters, I mean, they have a lot of the low 80s at pretty much every position, so they don't have a ton of weaknesses, but they don't have a ton of superlative areas. Muhammad, the biggest thing that you can say for him, he's a very good passer, but he's not very mobile, which means, Maryland, from what I remember when we played them previously, they did like to run a little bit of read option, get the quarterback in space, but still have him pass the ball. If we can just keep Muhammad hemmed in, don't let him get anywhere, and force him to, get some pressure and have to move away from the pressure, I think we can do a very nice job on him because he can't move. So I think sacks could be an area where we can get after the quarterback today and really try and force him into some mistakes by the pressure that we can apply with our good, solid defensive line coverage, and even bringing some linebackers and trusting our secondary to make some plays. Because that's the thing you'll see when you see Maryland's lineup. Eric Torres at halfback, very good. Larry Kirk behind him is a solid player. Torres is tearing it up right now. But if we can shut down their rushing attack and force them to pass, I like our corners against their wide receivers all day, every day, and twice on Saturday, actually, when we play them, because they don't have a ton of stud receivers. Jonathan Brown, he's your marquee guy to watch because he's going to be in the slot. Slot is where we always get killed just because of the way the game plays. Corner routes and out routes from the slot are just horrific to defend, but he's fast as heck. So if he runs those routes, he can beat us. Tony Lewis, Nick Dukes don't particularly intimidate me. Howell's a good quick player as well, but Jonathan Brown is going to be the one guy to watch out for. Brittain is still their starter at tight end. He's fine, nothing too exciting, but Brown is the one guy to watch. 96 speed from the slot. That matchup with him and Brian Youngling, especially if he ever gets covered up by Cedric Granger, who's our dime corner, that's an area they can exploit. He's our slowest corner. If they get him matched up on Granger, we'll really need to watch out for that. You look at their line, though, pretty much all like 78s to 80s across the board for the most part, mid-80 type guys. Not terrible, but hopefully we can exploit that. On defense, Mike Fox is a stud. 88 overall right end, 5.5 sacks last year. He's already got a sack and a half this year. I think he had 8 tackles for a loss already or something absurd in 2 games. He's incredible. Got to watch out for him. Their middle of their defense is actually solid in defensive tackle. Anderson, Jordan, Jenkins, they're all very solid. Isaiah Garrett's an impact player as a true freshman at outside linebacker, but I think he's somebody that we can exploit. Looks like a good player for the future, but I don't think he's there just right now. Brian Bennett at middle linebacker is good. He's really fast, so he can cover the field. I'd expect him to have a good number of tackles for them. And that backup middle linebacker is who will actually be starting at outside linebacker with Jackson injured. Decent player, but nothing to be too worried about. Chase Andrews and David Dahl, solid corners. They have good speed. But once you get beyond that to Kenny Pearson, Cameron Leak, Lee Bullock, etc., not a ton of speed and not a ton of ability, and I think that's where we can exploit them. Jay Keys, he'll get his usual catches, 5-6 catches, etc., but the guys who really need to step up in this game are going to be Paul Lease, KJ Welsh in the slot. They can hammer those nickel and dime corners, I think, for sure. Manuel Brady at free safety is a very solid player, good speed. Dominic Moore at strong safety is solid as well. They're decent there, but I think those nickel and dime corners are who we're really going to have to take advantage of if we want to win this football game. Kicker, they're solid. Punter's fine. I don't think that's going to make or break the game for them. Like I said, it's going to come down to the quarterback battle. I think aerial attack, we can beat them provided we don't make too many mistakes. I can see us, Muhammad threw 3 picks last game. If we can force him into something similar this game and limit the number of turnovers we have, that'll make things a lot easier on our team, protecting the football, moving it down the field, getting a few splash plays from the likes of Davion Reynolds, CJ Kirk, etc., and we can come away with a victory. So let me know in the comments who you think's going to win. The big games around the country as well. And as always, hail to Pitt. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.